Ladies and gentlemen, let's get ready to crumble!
I'm Joshua Kemble, and welcome to Joshua Kemble's Livestream. I've been a freelance illustrator and graphic designer for over 20 years. I was an art director for 9 years. And when I'm not art directing and working on illustrations and graphic designs, I'm working on comic books and graphic novels, and that's usually what I do during my streams. And while conversations can go all over the place on this stream, from spicy and entertaining to goofy and silly, one thing stays consistent throughout every stream. I'll always be working on art. So pull up a chair, get your art supplies out, and get ready for an entertaining show that'll keep you company while you work on your own personal art projects. This is Joshua Kemble's Art Stream. All right, we're live. So today, or tonight, I'm going to be working for a couple hours on page 104 of Not Death But Love, The Strange Supernatural Story of Elizabeth Barrett Browning. It's been a while since I've streamed live. I've been getting curriculum ready for classes that I'm teaching and just doing quite a lot of stuff, including freelance for clients and yard work, all that kind of fun stuff. But I need to start making progress again on my graphic novel for Turner Publishing. And so anyhow, we're working on page 104. We're going to be working on shading. And so I'll pull that up in a second. But before I get to that, I want to continue the series that I've been kind of doing where I'm kind of going through also my guitar collection. So because it's super late, I won't be playing this one, but I'm going to show it and just kind of talk about it. So far we've, let's also have a drink. Hold on. Okay. So what I'm going to be showing you guys is initially I showed you guys my Squire Stratocaster, which was like it was my second guitar. My first was a terrible guitar called the Sensonics that I don't own anymore. The first one I showed you guys was the Squire 2 Stratocaster from the 80s that was modded and stickered and battle worn from many shows when I was a young teenager and early 20-something. I showed you guys the Squire Telecaster. I showed you guys a Jasmine acoustic, which was like my first decent acoustic. I showed you guys a Siegel S6, which was my first solid top acoustic. Show you guys my modded Telecaster Squire that ends up having P90s on it and is a shreddy Telecaster. I showed you guys the Sterling Bass Stingray, which I got so that I could record and record bass lines. It's a great bass. And then I showed you guys my Fender Telecaster, my first actual Fender, which is my favorite guitar. And I'm a Telecaster guy, so I showed you guys that. I showed you guys my Luna VM Soprano, which is my little ukulele. And then I showed you guys my Gibson SG Standard, which is rad. I showed you guys the Les Paul 59 Epiphone, inspired by Gibson. And then I showed you guys, because of that, the inspired by Gibson Hummingbird, which was my first all solid wood acoustic guitar. So that catches us up for the guitars I've shown you thus far. And now I'm going to show you guys my Yamaha FG75. So here we go. I think I've played this before on stream, possibly, but if I haven't, I'll rectify that sometime in the near future. So this is a Yamaha. It is a red label FG75. And I had read about red label guitars for a long time. And again, because I had like 3 Dreadnought acoustic guitars, and I was really enjoying the this all solid wood Epiphone Hummingbird, I felt like I don't really need a better dreadnought. Like that's kind of as good as it's going to get for a dreadnought. But then I was, sitting around in the parlor and I was thinking, man, it'd be great to have like a parlor guitar. So something I do is I keep an eye on the Goodwill website. Like the Goodwill is just like has a website that for thrifters like me, people who grew up in the 90s particularly and grew to love thrift stores, people who grew up poor like me and found thrift stores to be a way to acquire things. I was like, I'll keep an eye on the guitars there. And one day, a Yamaha Red Label FG75 shows up there, and it's going for under $100. And the neck is in pretty bad shape. I can tell that the frets are pretty much worn down, and the action seems a little high, and the body did not look like this. It was really dirty, but it had the red label, and I had read so many good things about Yamaha red labels made in the 1970s by Nippon Gaikai, which is like the factory in Japan that notoriously made this very rare series of Yamahas. And they just are great guitars. Like Elliott Smith played one. A bunch of great musicians have kind of called it the poor man's Martin and Co. And so I was like, you know what? Under $100, I've always wanted to refret a guitar. I've never been able to refret a guitar, but I bet I could refret that, clean it up, and it would be a great guitar. And so I bought it, and then I pulled all the frets. I sanded and radiused the neck. So the neck has like a 16-inch or 16 radius. And then I cleaned it up. It took a lot of cleanup. I adjusted the truss rod. I replaced the saddle with a compensated saddle because the bone nut and the bone saddle on the original was just, if it even was bone, was like worn to the point where the strings were touching the wood of the bridge. So I got a compensated saddle. I sanded it down so that it would fit. I did a similar thing on stream. If you guys want to see how I did it with a classical guitar. But anyhow, this was my first time doing this after watching a ton of videos. And what ended up happening is it went from a guitar that showed up feeling like a really used guitar to one of the best playing acoustic guitars I own. I love it. It's super loud. That is a characteristic of first off, like parlor guitars are a little clangier. They're a little more, a parlor guitar is generally what people are going to play blues on. Dylan's early stuff was played on a parlor, not on a Yamaha, of course, but like on a 005, I think. I can't even remember the number, but it's like a Martin and Co. Parlor guitar. And I just love it. I love this guitar. I wish I could play it for you guys. It's a little too late to be playing music. So again, I'll play this on another stream. But what was also fun was the thing was so beat up, and it still has some war wounds. Like you can see some discoloration, some dings on the side. But what's surprising is just with a little bit of cleanup, and here you can see like some belt scratching and stuff. But with just a little bit of cleanup, suddenly these beautiful things in the wood come out. Like there's some really interesting figuring in the wood. And it's just a great guitar. So I got this for under $100, and I'd say fixed it up to where I would say I probably wouldn't part with this. I probably just won't part with this guitar. I also refretted it with jumbo frets and stainless steel frets, and polished the frets. Cleaned the fret ends, and really set the action as best as I could for a guitar that's older than I am. But it plays like a guitar that's not older than I am. And I think it'll last for another 10 years, 20 to 30 years. And I was able to even keep the original tuners, which are not great. They're little butterbean, vintage tuners. but yeah, so for me, this is a really special guitar because it's the first guitar I bought used. I bought vintage, and I didn't pay vintage prices. And I ended up fixing it up, and it worked, and it gave me confidence to kind of continue that in the future. So I might be fixing up other guitars, but I will say the red label thing is not a myth. These things are killer guitars with a great tone. I've recorded a couple songs on the new No Saboteurs album that my friend and I are working on. I've recorded with this guy a couple times already. So, yeah, that just shows you I felt like it was ready for recording. And I love it. I love it. And now I have a good parlor guitar. And the beauty of a parlor guitar is I can leave this, out on a guitar stand. And it's really easy to pick up and noodle around. I don't have to be super precious with it because, again, I bought it for under $100, and then I think I put maybe $40 into the stainless steel frets and the bone nut. Oh yeah, I forgot to mention the nut on it originally was awful, so I had to pop that off and sand it down and refile a new nut. That's like this thing up here. But what's great is like with those fixes, $50 in it. It's just an excellent guitar. It's one of my favorites. So that's guitar number 12 of my obnoxiously growing guitar obsession and guitar collection. But I have to say, it's also just like it's really fun to take something old and forgotten about that somebody just gave to a thrift store and just kind of forgot about and revive it to where it's playable and usable and it'll get more life. So I'm excited about that. I'm curious to know the past history of it. That would be a lot of fun. It's too bad guitars don't come with. I feel like used guitars should come with like photographs of the previous owners, just so like what city was this gigged in? Because this guitar was played a lot. Like I said, the frets were just worn to shreds. So it makes me wonder. But anyhow, so that's the guitar thing now. Now that I've spent a good 10 minutes or so doing that, let's get to work. Let's get to work. That was the fun part. Let's do work now. Let's do comics. So okay. So here is page 104, and what I'm doing is basically you'll see I've already toned one panel, and I'm going to be toning the other panels, or seeing how many panels I can tone in about an hour and a half to 2 hours. And prior to streaming today, I got some tests printed up for some classes I'm teaching. I got some freelance revised for a client, and now I can focus on the fun stuff, working on comics. I read somebody's post today, like a friend of mine made a post about kind of quitting comics, and one of the reasons they had kind of given up. And they were talking about just the immense amount of work and how it kind of cuts into your life and your happiness. And I kind of understand where they're coming from. I think I've said this before, but it's like I can understand why a lot of people like I love comics. And comics are a very abusive relationship. Let's put it that way. And I haven't even been, doing comics as long as some guys I know, or as prolifically as some people I know. But I can say it's a love thing, because if you don't love it, you're really probably not going to do it, because it's just full of so many sacrifices. And not to like say, oh, poor me, I'm sacrificing or anything. It's just it is a hard thing to do, and for very little reward. If you think about this, I'm on page 104. I'm easily a year into this project. And at the end of this, if I am lucky, since it's an indie, it'll get some readers, but most of those readers are going to zip through it in like a day, maybe 2 days. Panels that I spent, 6 to 8 hours on each. some pages that I might have spent like 2 or 3 days on, and it'll just go by in the blink of an eye, you know. All that preparation, those roughs, the thumbnails, the script breakdown, all of it, you know, is like gone in an instant. And I will say, like, there's something about that like it can be really disheartening. Um, I I don't know why it doesn't dissuade me from doing it, but I enjoy comics and I love the medium and I really believe in its potential. And I also I just like I kind of feel compelled to make them. So it's like a love thing. It's like I can't really choose. I guess with love you can't really choose what you love, right? um so yeah, but anyhow, I read this friend's post and I kind of empathized because I was like, yeah, I mean, I've definitely had times in my life where I've thought, man, you know, if I didn't feel compelled to make comics, um, how much better my life might potentially be. You know, and I'm not saying that as like a oh poor me as a victim because like again, I really enjoy making comics. I just empathized with why. Anytime somebody quits comics, I can understand why. Let's put it that way. Um, but like but again, I really like storytelling, and to me like that's kind of the fun of it is the storytelling and then eventually the end process, the end result. But I do think that's also another reason why the guys who are in the trenches, you know, I don't know, I you know, I've talked about this before, but I feel like by completing one of these things, especially a graphic novel, or let's even make it smaller than a graphic novel, like completing an issue, like a full issue of a comic, like let's say over 24 pages of comics, you know, to tell a story. Um, I do feel like there's a reason that um, I and a lot of cartoonists I know, if you haven't really gotten there, it's hard to have. It's hard to kind of view you as like, okay, we're kind of in the same battle here, right? Because to an extent, if you haven't really bothered to finish one, it'd be kind of equivalent to like a writer. You know, writers I know will have, you know, a couple scripts that they've finished or screenplays that they've finished or a novel that they've written or a book of poetry that they've written or, you know, something, and they've finished it. And they did all the hard work and the due diligence and the time alone to kind of live with a script for a little bit, you know, do revisions. They were in the trenches, right? And I guess the way I was gonna view it is like, because comics are kind of annoying to do, like they're hard to do, it's hard work. I guess it's got to be. I mean, nothing similar because it's not like we're at war. But I have made that comparison of like, you know, the book The War of Art and stuff like that, where, you know, being creative is a bit of psychological warfare, at least, right? You're having to kind of overcome pretty extreme obstacles to kind of do this thing that some people don't even think is worth it, right? But we love it, so we do it. And there's a part of that that's like, I think of like a soldier. If a soldier's been to war, right? They've been to war, they've been in a couple battles, and then they meet some dude in basic, like basic training, and that guy's like, "Yeah, like I'm a warrior. I'm gonna go to war," and you're like, "Yeah," you know. I I'm just saying, like there might be a part of does that sound pretentious? I don't know, Gary. If you're still listening, does that sound like an elitist thing? I just feel like you earn your stripes in comics by actually being in the fight and like doing a comic. Um, and I think like you know, until you've done that, then like, you know, okay, like cool, try comics. That's great. Everybody should do it, I think. Even though, like I said, it's a pretty rough road to get there. So and to get to the finish line, right? And I'm pretty slow at these things, man. I've talked about that. Like there's people I know who are like way faster. way more prolific and stuff like that. But I will say I stay in the fight and I'm pretty stubborn with it. And I don't know. But like I said, reading that post by the friend, it's like I still get it though. I get why somebody wouldn't want to do this. Much like I don't know, I like thinking about it like, let's say you're like a pro bodybuilder or something, right? And you're just like working out like 6 hours a day or 7 hours a day and like eating these weird diets and like starving yourself before competitions and like just absurdly focusing on like your body mass and like I'm sure I don't really know anything about uh professional bodybuilding or anything, but I just imagine that's probably a lot of work and it's probably really hard. And I imagine there's probably a lot of people who maybe would think like, yeah, I'm going to be a pro bodybuilder, right? And then they end up in it and they're like, man, this kind of just sucks. Like this is eating away all my time, you know. It's just a lot of work. It's like it's just not fun, right? And I'd imagine in that community, right, there's probably respect for people who like kind of stay in it and do the work to kind of get them results, right? As opposed to like people who kind of stop by as like passengers or whatever. But then again, like I'm also sure that there's probably empathy for people who are like try it and are like, man, this sucks. I guarantee a lot of people who are like in that field or in that hobby or whatever you want to call it might dip their toes in the water and be like, man, this isn't worth it. And I'd imagine people who are in the community for a long time who are doing all the sacrifices and stuff would probably be like, yeah, I mean, I kind of can't blame you because it is hard. It's, I think that's just kind of how it works. I was just listening to, like in my armchair interests, I was listening to like a physicist being interviewed about black holes, and it was super cool. But I was like also thinking, man, it's funny because I will get stuck in like I think this happens to comics people or anybody of any kind of interest where you get so stuck in like a silo of like, hold on a sec. There's a light that fell. Let me adjust that. If it will adjust. There we go. So yeah, sometimes I think as an artist or creative of any type, honestly, just of anybody with any interests, I think you can kind of get stuck in a silo where you'll kind of think your problem is unique, or like your struggle or whatever it is unique. And then like for me, one thing that helped was like listening to this physicist because I was realizing, holy crap, like I feel like comics are a lot of work. And this guy, out of his passion, on top of teaching classes, because a lot of those guys, are working at universities, so they're spending, a lot of them teaching like a full slate of classes. So that means coming up with curriculum, grading, dealing with students, dealing with classroom control, all of that stuff. And then on top of that, are also writing papers, like scientific papers that require research, that require lab work, that require just vexing brain problems, that I'm sure are really frustrating to kind of work through because you're trying to kind of go into undiscovered territory with scientific problems and stuff. And then also you're doing scientific research, which a lot of it is slow and boring, and in the case of like theoretical physicists, I think this was the theoretical physicist, it's like dealing with like quantum stuff. It's like with that, a lot of it is like just sitting and doing math or calculating or inputting into a computer math, but like you're just working out mathematical calculations. You're like speculating a cool idea, and then you're spending years, potentially maybe decades, just like doing math equations, seeing if it works out. And all of that on the off possibility, actually probably strong possibility that your theory that you're working from is wrong, or that maybe there's an error in your math, and also knowing that when you publish it, right, it's just going to be scrutinized. Like, that's part of the scientific process, right? So it's like the second you publish results of an experiment or like a crazy cool new hypothesis or something like that, it's not like being able to like post like, you know a, a, a rant on Twitter or like a blog posting or something where it's like, oh, maybe you'll get some pushback by the media. No, it's like the profession is based on just taking what you did and scrutinizing it and seeing if it's testable, if it can be repeated in a lab, if the science is good, if the math is good. And you're going to have every mathematician that's at your level basically running your calculations of like a decade of work or more or less, who knows. My point is, I was listening to this guy talk about black holes and neutrinos, which are like one of my favorite things on earth and in the universe, not just on earth. But it was kind of interesting, and he was talking about like the holographic theory of like the event horizons of black holes and all this interesting stuff. And I was just realizing like this guy's older than me, but not that much older than me. And I feel like sometimes comics are hard. you know? But that I don't know. For me, that put it in perspective, because I was like, yeah, I mean, so maybe I spend, a little bit like of time working on a book or whatever. But it's like, I don't know. It's literally not rocket science. like um and or if you think about like designers that are working on things like aircraft or something like that. Imagine like what it would feel like to be an engineer who builds an aircraft that has a massive engineering flaw, right? And it just causes like the death of like a bunch of passengers on a flight or something, and that maybe that was like your baby project for like 20 years or something. Right? I'm just saying, like, life is hard, jobs are hard, passions are hard, you know. Playing guitar is hard. Like, I'm not even that good at playing guitar. I'd like to get better at it, right? The guys that I've seen that can like just shred and they know every single, you know, um scale, they have it all memorized and stuff like that. It's like those dudes spend so much time practicing, and I guarantee you they probably have moments of like, why am I playing guitar? you know, why have I been practicing for 8 hours a day for 40 years or whatever, Um yeah, so I don't know. It's just putting it in perspective. But anyhow, this is my long-winded rant of saying, when I read my friend's post though about not really wanting to risk their own, sanity and stuff like that to make comics, I got it. I understood it. And I also will say that's healthy too, because you like, no matter how passionate you are about anything, it's not worth like, your life or your family's well-being or something, right? It's just, I don't know. That's my take on it. Like, I love comics and stuff like that, but at the end of the day, like, I'm gonna make sure I take care of myself and sleep and hang out with my kid and do all those other things too. And maybe that costs me a book or two by the time I'm dead, right? Because I do know some guys, man, they're just like obsessed with creation and that's all they do. They just like make art like all day, all night, um, at the cost of everyone. Gary said, I'm curious if I know the person. You might. But anyhow, so I was just saying, like, um, I'm not trying to call that person out either. Because again, I get it. I actually understand it. And this thing is hard and it can be all consuming. And it probably isn't worth your mental health, right? Um, we but at the same time, I love it and I'm gonna keep doing it. even though it's not super rewarding. You know, because I like telling stories, and it's also like I've talked about this before, but it's like it's interesting. It's such a fascinating medium. Like you never quite crack the code. I don't know if that makes sense. Like one of the things that makes me obsessed with like playing Risk, the game of Risk or whatever. If you guys are new to this stream, maybe you don't know this, but I'm obsessed with the game of Risk. Um and like I think one of the things that makes it interesting is the variables. Like it's very simple, but you never are gonna quite. I don't know. It just feels like a very complicated thing, even though it seems simple at first, and that keeps me really fascinated and intrigued with it. Comics are like that, but like times a million, because there's just no. I don't know. It doesn't feel like there's a mastering of it. So I don't know. They keep my interest. But I will say, if I was talking to someone, I've had times in my life too, where I would be the someone if I was talking to, where I would give the advice of like, hey, maybe chill on the comics, you know, because when I was younger, there's just times where I would like just put everything to the side for comics, and I will say that is not worth it. So if somebody is at that point with comics where they're just putting everything by the wayside and comics always come first, maybe you should consider something else. Or maybe you'll just be like some killer cartoonist with like 10 more graphic novels than me, and that's fine too. But to me, that's like the line I'm not willing to cross. Like I'm not going to put everything at risk for a book. However, I do love books and I love comics, and I will probably, as long as I'm able to draw, keep carving away at them. Whether it's in my spare time, very slowly, or very quickly, I'm just not going to be able to not work on this. But I've talked to a lot of cartoonists too about that, and it's like I don't know how many of us do it like as a choice, or a lot of us just kind of do it like I don't know, we're just going to do comics, like that's just what we do. you know and the reason I was bringing up the warrior thing though is like I do feel like there are sometimes, and this does not apply to the post I read, but I do feel like there are some times where some people just don't really maybe put in like don't realize that everything in life is work, right? And so it's like I understand why somebody would give it up and stuff like that. And again, I relate to that, but I also feel like if people are looking for like an easy ride in life, like something that's enjoyable and fun and doesn't cost anything and is like free and nice and wonderful and doesn't require work, it's like I don't know where they're looking for that, because I don't really know of anything that does that, right? Because let's say like camping was my hobby. Well, camping's expensive, so now you got to make enough money to go camping, right? It's not extremely expensive, but now you got to get supplies and you got to get materials, and then weirdly enough, like even camping can be hard work. Where you're like, yeah. And if you're like, okay, well, I don't want to do camping, I just want to stay in like hotel rooms all the time. Well, that's expensive too. Christopher Runciman said, "Good evening, gentle persons. I've heard tell Christopher Runciman that you have a new book. And I know that I think we got Mr. Pate slated in and Artcasters, but we got to slate you in too, get you back on Artcasters to talk about your book, my dude. If you haven't already been asked by one of the dudes." Yeah, Christopher, if you guys have not seen his channel, he does really cool comics based on prompts that users are in. Is it ready to order? Gary said, I placed an order for a certain new Runciman book. I'm gonna write that down so that I can place a new order as well. Give me 2 seconds to write that down. Runciman book. Sweet. Gary said it's up on Amazon. Sweet. Well, then I'm ordering it too. Gary said the shipping time is a long time. I can only assume he's delivering it personally. Is that true, Christopher? Do you hand deliver? Like when someone orders your comic, do you show up at their door? Here's a funny story about hand delivering comics. Now this is gonna be hearsay potentially because this is something I heard a long time ago, but it was really fascinating and charming, and I'm pretty sure it's true. But take it with a grain of salt. If I was not currently shading a comic book panel, I would look it up to see if it was verified. But I heard a story that when Chris Ware was first starting cartooning in Chicago and was making Acme novelty books that were, self-published, and this is like the day and age where most people who were kind of buying his books were like subscribers, like they were on like a list, or they do like mail order and stuff like that, and then it was like available at like really small like indie shops. I have heard that he used to bike copies of Acme Novelty Library to customers locally. That's what I had heard. And so like literally was showing up when you order his comic. You might have Chris Ware at your door back in the day. Yeah, Christopher was saying it takes time for me to skip across America. Even with stilts, Christopher? Because I had heard that the way you were doing this with comics was that you had extraordinarily long stilts. And so with a quick stride, you could be, stateside. And another quick stride, you could be all the way, you could be in my neck of the woods. You guys got to watch out. Oh, Christopher said those are my legs, sir. That is true. I don't know if you guys are aware of this. Mr. Runciman is a very tall man. And much like Johnny Appleseed, walks around North, South America, Canada, spreading the seeds of his comics to all readers everywhere. Here's a question. Tall tales, right? Do you think somebody actually believed them? Do you think somebody thought like, yeah, Johnny Appleseed, it's like this is a real story. This is a true story. Do you think that was like the kind of misinformation back in the day? Somebody's like, well, everybody knows these seeds were grown. This tree was grown by Johnny Appleseed. What were a couple of those other ones? Do you guys remember those? For quite a few of them, and the only one I can remember right now of the tall tales is Johnny Appleseed. I'm trying to remember other ones. Aren't there other Americana folk tales that I'm missing out on? Paul Bunyan. There we go. Yeah. And his ox. They had a big Paul Bunyan statue in Portland when I used to live there. There was a giant Paul Bunyan statue. It was kind of cool. Yeah, Gary said Washington refusing to lie about chopping down a cherry tree. Yeah, that's a tall tale. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it's amazing how many people think that one's a real one. There's also Lincoln's wooden teeth, but I think that one's real. I used to judge that as a young man, and now that I'm older, I'm like, yeah, I mean, I probably would have had wooden teeth back then too. I don't have the best teeth. I will say, living in the modern age, this is just showing you where my brain goes when I'm working on creative stuff. Living in the modern age, I am very thankful that we don't have to have wooden teeth anymore. I always wonder, oh my gosh, there was a Woody Allen movie, I'm blanking out, Midnight in Paris, I think, where it was based on this premise where it's like, hey, people who are like all nostalgic and they're like, man, I wish I was back there during the Salon in France or whatever it is. And then they end up back in those days, and it's like, it's not that great. Like nostalgia can be deceptive, and from what I remember, I think that was like the theme of the movie was like nostalgia can kind of be misleading. And I always thought that about like Victorian era stuff, where, like, for instance, this story that I'm writing, or not writing, this one that I'm illustrating, it takes place in Victorian England, and it is fun to watch stuff that takes place in Victorian England. And I think that dudes dressed really cool in Victorian times. Like, if I could afford to, I would be wearing, Jeremy Brett, Sherlock Holmes era suits and, outfits and stuff all the time because it's just dapper as hell. However, um, I don't think I'd want to live back then at all, in Victorian England, because like a lot of people when they read these stories, like they'll imagine that they'd be, you know, the very wealthy gentlemen or people in the stories, the Jane Austen novel. They'd be like the Jane Austen poor family that's so poor they can only afford like two maids. Um, a lot of them don't do the math that like, no, you'd probably be like not even at the level of the maid back then. But then also, not only that, but let's say you are like the wealthiest person in the world. Um, you probably don't have like a great refrigerator. There's probably not air conditioning. Yeah, there's just things that we have that are like so cool. At like the lower middle class in America, like we have so many more amenities and access to really cool things. Um, More food availability, better food, more fresh food. Um, I don't know. It's just interesting. Like we have access to so many cool things compared to like the wealthiest of society back then. Oh, we have cars. We don't have to do these like long horse-ridden trips. Um, can you imagine? Like now you have to like stop at a gas station. Can you imagine if on a long trek, let's say you're going to take a trip and do a road trip across America. Can you imagine like having to be on a wagon and like having like horses just like pooping all the time and stopping to like feed the horse and water the horse and take care of all the stuff they had to back then? That's a wildness. That's wildness. So here we go. We've got our Victorian gentleman, Mr. Home, in this case, not Holmes, but Home. And we're just going to shade as much as we can, in the next, hour or so. Because my goal is to do this for about 2 hours. Christopher, have you gotten a copy of it yourself yet? I'd hope so. I've been in like kind of scramble mode, getting lesson plans and stuff ready the last like month or so. So I feel like I've kind of dropped off the face of YouTube for a little bit. So I have a lot of catching up to do. Even on your streams, my dude. I gotta watch the more recent ones. Let's see. But I can't wait to see that book. Okay. So we are getting closer on this panel. So I was talking about that physicist thing that I was listening to, theoretical physicist. And again, it was one of those moments where when people talk about black holes, my brain is really interested, but it just fails to. I can't digest even like a pop physicist, who's like kind of breaking it down for like common folk to understand. It behooves me to be able to comprehend um, a black hole. Like that's just wild. They were talking about dark matter too. And it was really interesting because they were talking about how like most theoretical physicists don't like dark matter because it's kind of boring. Like it's just a particle, and that they'd rather it be like something really exciting, but like nothing else like mathematically works. It was really interesting because I was like, that's funny. I never thought of like physicists being like, does it have to be like finding something out and being like, oh, that's boring. Like, But that kind of makes sense. I wonder if there were people at the time that like gravity is kind of worked out who were just kind of disappointed because they're like, well, that's not magical. I thought that, the sky gods like, pushed the apple off the tree or I don't know. It's just, I kind of wonder if there was like disappointment in kind of losing some of the fun of that. Christopher said, I have the proof and have shown it on my stream. I'm waiting on 50 copies because I will be doing a signing. Nice. And he said, check your email. I have not, I haven't looked at it yet, but I did receive that email and I'm excited about it, but I still want a hard copy. So I will be purchasing a hard copy, my dude. Because I like my books as books. But yeah, that's definitely something I'll have to do very shortly. I might have to wait till the beginning of May just because we're on a budget here. But it will happen. I will get that hard copy. Okay. What do we got here? But yeah, I'm excited about it because I am a big fan of Christopher Runciman. If you guys have not checked out Christopher Runciman's channel or his book, you should. Very inspiring, and I will say very unique. Like I can't think of another cartoonist doing what Christopher Runciman is doing. The closest that comes to it is a guy I used to know in Portland named Jesse Recklaw, who used to do a comic called Slow Wave. And it was a website comic where people would submit their dreams, and then he would do their dreams, like illustrate their dreams as a comic, in like a 4-panel comic. It was really, really well done. And that kind of, it's not the same as what Christopher's doing, but I feel like at least theoretically it's kind of in a similar ballpark. But aside from that, I cannot think of anyone, and that's very unclose to what Christopher's doing, but it's a little similar. That's as close as I can think of anyone who's doing what Christopher Runciman is doing. In the execution and the way that he's working on comics. And it kind of makes sense a little bit, because a lot of the history of comics, people just didn't have the ability to like instantly reach out to their viewers or readers. But I will tell you, yeah, his approach, his fearlessness, his art style, it's all really cool. So you guys should check that out. Okay, we are doing the couch. Working on the couch. Getting closer to the hour mark. You guys, I know I joke that I have like a lot of guitars, but we're only now, after this stream, there's only really 2 guitars left to show. What will I do when I run out of guitars to show you guys? Christopher said, now I'm blushing. Well, I have to say nice things because, again, Christopher has the ability to, with 2 steps, with his incredibly long legs, with 2 steps, he could be at my front door all the way from Canada. Just knock, knock, knock. Who's that? He's like, did you say something bad about my cow? Oh, wait. Oh, my goodness. Christopher, you just brightened my day. Did I say 2 guitars? Christopher said in his question, collect banjos? ? Well, that reminds me, Christopher, I actually have 3 that I need to show. 3 guitars left to show. I had almost forgotten about the banjo. What do we got here? I don't know if I like it brightening so much here. I want it a little darker in value. Christopher said, don't even get started about all of your ukuleles. Well, I have one ukulele. I already showed one. I'm not like as, I like ukuleles a lot. And there's one that at some point, maybe when I'm like 90, I'll want to own, which is like they have these little nylon bass ukuleles that sound really cool. So maybe at some point. But really, I don't have the bug for ukulele. Like with a ukulele, I have like a decent little soprano ukulele. That's about as far as I want to go down the ukulele rabbit hole. He said dulcimers. Well, you know what I'm curious about? I will say I would like to have a mandolin at some point. That might be a byproduct of, being a kid who grew up in the 80s. And when you grew up in the 80s, there's no way you were not hearing a lot of mandolin rocked by REM. And so, might be fun to play mandolin. Also, it'd be cool to come up there is a lot of really rad Irish folk music that uses mandolin-ish instruments, and that's pretty cool. Christopher said, I'm after some bagpipes. I love it. I can't tell if you're joking or serious because I know a lot of weird musician types, Christopher. And I know a lot of people who will say that not joking, like they really want bagpipes. I'm not sure if you're joking or serious. I can't tell. Um, Christopher said, I'm just squeezing the cats a lot for now. Okay. That is interesting. Do cats kind of sound like bagpipes if you like squeeze them a little bit? The other thing I was going to say is, man, why did it take people so long to come up with strings that weren't made of the guts of cats? Like, I feel like that's one of the worst things about the music industry. Like, how many cats did people just off just to have like strings for their violin or whatever? you know? And I'm not like a massive, I'm not a vegetarian or anything like that, but I feel like even as a even as a meat eater, there's just something about offing a cat for their string to make strings. It's just it goes beyond the pale. Christopher said, "If you're good at squeezing cats, it will have that sound." Anyhow, I think I just had 5 violinists unsubscribe. They're like, "How dare you, sir?" Okay. So what do we have here? Have you ever gone down that rabbit hole of just questioning where when like whenever I look into things like instruments or food is another one that's really strange. Where there's some things like percussive instruments where it makes perfect sense how somebody discovered it, right? Like I mean, like drums, it just kind of makes sense. Like if you have a pan or a pot and you bang on it, it kind of makes a cool noise. I could imagine somebody being like, that sounds pretty cool. Maybe stretching something over it, being like, oh, that sounds really cool. Maybe they throw some like beans in it or something. And they're like, when they hit it, it sounds really like a snare. And they're like, that's pretty cool. I can see how drums evolve naturally, right? There's foods like that too, where it's like, okay, I could understand that. Like you're gonna heat this food so that you don't get sick, and then suddenly it tastes good when you heat it this specific way. But then there's weird stuff that I just am baffled by. Um, one of the big ones, and at some point, I'm sure I've looked this up in the past, but it'd be fun to look up again. Like bread. Like who came up with bread? It's such a weird. it's just it's kind of an insanely complicated thing to make. And I mean, it's pretty simple, but it's like, dude, who thought like, oh, you know what I need here is yeast. Like I just I don't know, bread is a weird one to me. And I'm sure there's an explanation on the internet about bread, but like to me that's really fascinating. Like that's a really weird thing to just kind of randomly discover and be like, "Oh, that's cool. It tastes pretty good." Alcohol makes sense. I can understand how people found out about alcohol, right? It's like somebody was making grape juice or something and then they left it a little too long and they're like, hey, this is kind of cool because if I like drink this grape juice, it's pretty nice. You know um a lot of that stuff, it's like it's just going to kind of naturally happen, and they're like, hey, if I leave this out in the sun, like this thing happens, or if I like that kind of makes sense to me. But there's processes that just are baffling to me, and I'm not sure where the impetus came from. Yeah, I guess that's a fair point. I mean, Christopher said somebody might have left wet out oats out on a rock on a hot day. I guess that's true. Dylan said hi. How's it going, Dylan? All right. So we got this getting finished. And then we're going to probably play a real quick trailer. And my guess is I'm going to get through one more panel after this, and then we'll call it for the night. Yeah, that's a good one. Haggis. Christopher said haggis. That was created by somebody on a dare. It had to have been. Yeah, I can see that. But anyhow, like instruments are like that too, where like I said, bread's always been a weird one to me. Still hard to envision. The yeast part is particularly weird to like figure out how they figured out how to make bread rise, all of that stuff. I'm sure some of that could happen accidentally. But basically we can get to like that kind of like some instruments are really weird too. Like I can understand how strings being stretched make that kind of boom, and then maybe when you stretch it a little tighter it makes like a boom, and you're like, huh. So you're like, okay, I'm gonna pull a bunch of different strings, stretch them, at different tensions, and wow, they make different noises. That makes sense to me. But who came up with, now that I know this about strings, I'm gonna murder a cat, take their guts, make a string out of it, rub a bow against it. Like, you know, rub that bow in rosin, so that it rubs against the cat's guts to the point where it makes a really pleasing sound. Like that to me is what was that? Was that like a psychopath on a murder spree with a kind of, I don't know, like a real hatred for cats? I don't understand. I just don't understand. Where did that come from? Christopher said good night to all of you wonderful, gentle persons. Good night, Christopher. But yeah, that one's always confusing to me. Okay. We got okay. So we're almost there on this one, but I need to turn off my guides, and then I got to do this business here. So now I'm just doing the drapes that are behind this person. This person being Sophie. Okay, now I'm going to just get the rest of it and add the shadows that are going to be from them. As well as the couch. Then we're going to just dim it just a little bit. And we'll turn the opacity. Dylan says it looks good. Thanks. Yeah, we're getting there. So again, I'm going to see how far I can get streaming for about 2 hours. We've been streaming for about 1. Maybe we'll be able to finish another panel of shading. So for me, that's been a balance. Like I will say when I was younger, what I would do with like a page like this is I would just stay up, for like and work for like 7 hours straight, and then sleep for like 2 hours, go to work. That to me is not like at this point not tenable or worth it, right? So for me, setting limits like where it's like, man, I really want to get this page done. I really need to get this page done. But I also really need sleep to function as a human being, you know. Um that to me has been really valuable is being able to say like, okay, I'm going to quit this at the 2-hour mark. That's actually, it's funny because a lot of people, like I remember during the 100 days of making comics challenge, a lot of people struggle is like, man, I can't even get going on my comic or whatever. And my problem is like, I have that down. Like I can work on my comics almost daily, right? My problem is when I work on my comics, I need to be better at, and I've gotten better at, particularly this last year or so. I've gotten better at being like, okay, I'm going to work on this for 2 hours because that's what I got. And that would get me, finished a little bit before midnight. And then that'll get me a decent amount of sleep for the next day. That's hard for me to do. That's actually harder for me to do than, you know, than I think people may realize because it is tempting when you're working on art. I think in general, when you're working on art, once you start getting into it, you start a flow. It is hard to like stop and be like, okay, I actually have to stop now, because that is the fun part about art. That a lot of people maybe don't talk about. It's fun to do art. It's fun to work on comics. Time flies, and you start getting in the zone and like things that were difficult suddenly become easier and quicker. There's days where like it's a slog and stuff, but in general, it's just kind of hard to learn how to balance so that you don't, you know, end up being in that spot where you can't balance making it with, leading a normal life. And like that to me has been like a really helpful thing to get better at. Yeah, Dylan was saying you can get into the zone for hours. Yeah, for sure. And it's like it's kind of hypnotic when you're doing it. 'Cause it's like, yeah, I'm like, getting this thing done. And then there's a bit of a video gameness to it too, where you're like, man, okay, now I've got one panel done. Now I need to get on to maybe just one more panel. It does have a little bit of commonality to like those level based games, where you're like, man, I'm almost the boss and I just got cleared this level. Oh, if I can just get to the checkpoint. Um, and much like video games, sometimes it's healthy to like be like, okay, I've been playing video games for 2 hours. That's a healthy time to stop. Don't like her butt having so much reflected light on it. That just doesn't make a lot of sense. Well, it defines the form and stuff. You need to kind of tone that back a little bit so it's a little more natural. Okay. Yeah, that's kind of working for me. Maybe we tone that back here too. Okay. Save, and then we're going to play a trailer. And then we will be working for probably another, like 50 minutes or something. So here is the trailer for, you know what? In honor of Jim Lujan. No. We'll play the Jim Lujan one later. In honor of Christopher Runtsman, because he stopped by, you guys should all check out his work and his new book. Here is Christopher's review of Jacob's Apartment.
Hi, my name's Chris and I like comics. I want to talk about this comic for a second here. I just got this in. I ordered it direct from my local comic shop through Diamond Distributing. It's Joshua Kemble's Jacob's Apartment. I really enjoyed this book. There's all kinds of comics out there, let's be honest. There's fun comics, there's superhero comics, there's young adult comics, there's adventure comics for kids. There's so many different things under the planet. But there's also an entire subgenre of alternative books. Real life, real world depictions in comic book form. Situations that happen to each and every one of us. And this is a fine example of that. If you get a chance, order this book from your local comic shop. You won't be disappointed. I can't sing its praises high enough. Okay? Check it out. Jacob's Apartment by Joshua Kemble.
All right, we got Frank in the chats. How's it going, Frank? How you doing tonight? Just going to be working for about 50 more minutes on shading this panel. Panel 3. So there's a couple things that I think are helpful, that have been helpful to me in making comics. And I'm getting better at them, and were weaknesses. I was talking about the ability to stop. So the ability to start and work is really important, right? Having kind of that fire, it can be really important to like creative work, especially writing, right? Getting motivation is like one of the earliest struggles that most writers deal with. Heck, my first comic was about that, right? I wrote a comic called Numb, and it was basically, your typical first comic where it's like, man, I'm dealing with writer's block and a breakup, and this is really tough. What do I write about? That's usually like a young artist's struggle, is like, how do I find inspiration? How do I filter out, like, I have a million things that I want to do. How do I filter out some of those so that I can do at least one of them, right? I have a million ideas. I have a million stories I want to do, right? Or I have nothing. I have a blank page, and this is really scary because it really matters, and everything I do is, and you almost like psych yourself out to where like you don't sit down to do the work. So step one is like learning how to sit down, do the work. And a lot of why I think like foundation classes, like foundation art classes, are kind of teaching you a little bit about step one, and then they're getting you to play and learn different tools, like different, like maybe try watercolor, maybe try, try ink, try pen and ink, try like a quill, try like a brush, try life drawing, try 2D design. And so you're like baking in some tools and then some foundations that I would recommend you guys check out Corey Kerr's channel, because he's been going over a lot of those foundations, like contrast and drawing by shape and being able to break things down into shape, and then process, right? Like learning how to do roughs and really focus on composition and In the case of like storytelling, right? A lot of it's like storyboarding and learning how to like not cross the line and tell a coherent story. And like, you're learning all of these things. You're kind of like absorbing like all this information. And hopefully through this information, you're going to do something with it. But the struggle of a young artist is you're absorbing all this information. It's a lot to juggle. Generally, when you first try every tool, you're not great at it. Like, I remember my first time, man, when I was like in my late teens, actually. I remember getting really excited because I took a painting class at the junior college, and in high schools, like they're always on like limited budgets. So like when you have painting, usually you're painting in like tempera, like you're painting in like tempera, or you're painting with like cheap watercolor sets and stuff like that. And then you take a real painting class, you get the materials, you feel like crap, like this is expensive, like. And generally when you're a young art student, you're on a budget, so you're like, man, bringing for like 6 or 7 tubes of like decent oil paint is just like, it's expensive. Like even today I would have trouble springing for like quality paints because it's very expensive, or like take a watercolor class and finally get some good watercolors, right? And you learn about like sealed containers that are going to keep your watercolors fresh. And you have these beautiful pigments, and you're all excited. And then you try it, like your first time trying a medium seriously, you're just going to suck. Like it's just the way it goes. Every once in a while, you'll have one where you just take to it immediately and you're like, I absolutely love this. And you feel great, right? Because every critique in class, you're like rocking it and stuff like that. But a lot of the time, you're learning these new tools. You're experimenting with different tools. You're learning how to use different mediums. You're learning how to work from light to dark. You're learning how to work from dark to light. You do ink, you do scratch board. So you're like learning inverted ways of creating value. And then you're learning value. There's so much you're learning. It's a lot to absorb. And in the meantime, anytime you have free time to draw, at least for me at that point, it was like, what do I draw? Like, because, in class you have assignments, it's like, okay, today, class, I put a plant on this table. You're going to draw this plant. And then you're like, you have the challenge, you have the problem to solve right in front of you. And, you try your darndest to solve it, and then you get critiqued and you get better at solving that problem. So now you can draw that potted plant or whatever it is, or paint that, watercolor painting that includes 5 textures or whatever it is, color wheel assignments, even the color wheel, that's like an assignment. Okay, now we're going to do an analogous palette, all of this stuff. But then, like, as a young artist, it's like when you're able to sit with yourself, it's like it's really hard to come up with stuff. But the inverse starts happening when you get older. So you have to like, it's like you have to learn the lesson of like sitting down and getting obsessed with it, getting obsessed with the paint, getting obsessed with the medium, getting obsessed with the value, getting obsessed with these things, getting obsessed with life drawing. Because it just takes so much work to get all those things down, all those foundations, and to get your butt in the chair to do it, right? And so you finally build this habit. And finally, from building that habit, like hopefully, you start creating your own body of work. You get over that hurdle of the blank page. And suddenly you finish something or finish a few things, and you suddenly get bit by the bug of like, wow, I can make stuff, and I can make stuff that's my own. And this is really exciting. I remember with comics, like that first comic, the first serious comic I did, Numb, it was like a profound experience for me because I was like, wow, I did this. I wrote it. I illustrated it. I came up with it from nothing. And now there's a story in the world that's a published book. Like it's a published thing. And it felt as good as like the first time I wrote a story, and I mean, really wrote a story, like where you write it, you revise it, you send it to friends, you get like feedback, all of that stuff. You do your fifth draft and you read this story and you're like, I can't even believe I wrote this, you know. And maybe there's parts where you're like, wow, I can't believe I even wrote this. It's awful. But at the same time, you realize like, oh, this is possible. And then like it decodes what all those authors you've been reading your whole life were doing, right? It gives you a little glimpse in like, wow, these, you know, you get to see what the superheroes really, what their superpower really is, you know, and you both lose some kind of magic in that process, right? Because you realize like, oh, it's not a superpower. But then you gain some magic because you're like, wow, it's like a crazy superpower because it's a lot of work and it's like self-discipline and all this other stuff. So fine. Okay. So anyhow, flashing forward, the new problem becomes the opposite, right? Where you suddenly train yourself to like do this, to be obsessed with it. And suddenly you have this obsession and you are able to sit down and work and create things. And so now it's about like moderation, weirdly enough. Like, and that's the lesson I've been learning on the later half of my art career. I don't know if I call it the latter half, but it's like, you know, years in now, that's kind of the thing I need to get better at is the, how do I continue to kind of keep the fire and the interest in what I'm doing, but also balance that with life and moderate it to where like, you know, like I'm not making like, you know, wild choices like staying up past midnight, you know, to work on a book. And again, there's times where maybe you have to make that choice, right? Like, you know, if the book is all your income, then maybe you do need to stay past midnight to finish the book or whatever. But in general, it's like it'll be here tomorrow and I'll be here tomorrow. And it's not the end of the world if this page doesn't get done. Which is hard because that's like reverse engineering what you need to originally feel, which is, yeah, it is the end of the world if I can't get this done. You almost have to have that urgency, you know, to get into it in the first place. Especially publishing and all of that stuff, because it's like super competitive too. So it's like you really kind of have to feel that urgency. So then to have to step back from that has been a really interesting but very like joyful experience for me. Yeah. And I will say, I think a lot of it has to do with my kid, because I think if I had never had a kid, I might have gone down the like crazy obsessed like Robert Crumb route to things. And I don't think that's super healthy. You know, as much as I love Robert Crumb's work, I think he's a genius. You know, but it's like I also think Einstein's a genius. But you know, when I read about Einstein's personal life, I don't know if he was the wisest man when it came to like moderating his own life. You know. So anyhow, that's been an interesting thing that I've been kind of thinking about. And I might have talked about on here. Who knows? But yeah, it's an interesting thing. Like the artist journey is a very strange one where you're first kind of a sponge, you're absorbing, you're working really hard, you're learning to care. You're learning to care and respect what it is that you're doing and the field that you're entering and the artistry behind it and the craftsmanship of it, right? And then you're just like gritting your teeth and grunting to get into it. And then I think like after all that, it's like you have to learn opposite lessons, you know. Like the best way I can kind of paraphrase what I'm saying is like I think in order to make a book, you have to feel like that book needs to be made, like it's important, like books matter, like everything you do matters, you know, and you can make something that contributes to this long history and stuff. You got to really feel that to kind of have the wherewithal to do it. But then from there, it's like you also have to, like, it's like that weird counterintuitive thing where you then have to learn, yeah, your book really isn't the center of everything. Like, it really doesn't matter. And like, what does matter is, like, these other really urgent, important things. And it's a weird thing where it's like, so it makes sense that people struggle with it, and it makes sense that people quit, and it makes sense that that people also have trouble even starting, because it's a weird thing where you're kind of having to learn like multiple lessons, because you can go too far the other way. Like, I could end up being at a point where I don't care, like, where I start feeling like, it's just a book, whatever. Like, and I could get to a point where that becomes so extreme that I just absolutely stop making things, and then like 10 years later go like, wow, I had all that time, what did I do, so it's this weird, I don't know if I'm explaining it that well. I don't think it's all that profound what I'm saying. It's just a hard thing to like verbalize, but it's been interesting. Frank said the plant challenge regarding the draw the spotted plant. But even all of that stuff's like really good exercise, it's not bad. I brought up like the war analogy or whatever, but making this analogous to wartime or something like that. Like, when you're recruited to the army, what's the first thing they do, right? They send you to basic training. You live, breathe, and sleep the army, right? You learn everything there is about it. You get your body physically fit to do it. You undergo rigorous training. You learn all this crazy stuff, and you work really hard to kind of get discipline and get dedication and care for what you're doing, right? But if your whole life was just basic training and you never actually like get into the real thing, it almost undoes the purpose of the training. And I guess that's what I'm getting at, is like, I think there's a thing with artists where you need training that makes you care and passionate and dedicated and caring about the craft and learning the tools and all that stuff. And also just learning how to be inspired and make stuff, but you also at some point have to be able to balance that with living, you can't be in basic training all day, at least I can't. I know some guys who do. I know some are like, there's some cartoonists. We had a cartoonist on our Artcasters once. It's one of the most prolific people I have ever met, and I respect and admire their work so much. But I was asking him, like, what's your trick? Because they put out like a comic almost like every month, like, a new, like, at least 4 or 5 graphic novels a year. Kids books, everything, and just like constant work machines. And I was like, how are you doing this? like, and they were like, drugs. And I'm like, ha ha ha. Like, I thought they were joking. And they were like, no, literally, I'm on these specific drugs to kind of make myself not have to sleep. And I was like, oh, wow, that's not great. like, I mean, for them, I'm sure that works. But I was like, okay, that's not a life I want to do. Not that I judge it. It's just like, I don't know. So, yeah, I don't know. I don't know where that all goes, but I know that it's an interesting journey being an artist, you know. Okay. We've got 30 minutes left, guys. And I am shading the heck out of this coat. Look at that coat. That's a beautiful coat. I have to say, of all the coats, this is the most beautiful, definitely a beautiful coat. A big, beautiful coat. I need to start talking about my art like a salesman. So I had this art teacher when I was younger that used to say drawrings all the time. Drawrings, like as in drawers. and she was hilarious. She was in my junior college, but she had like a Brooklyn accent, and she used to be like, "Kids on your drawings, we're gonna do our drawings today." And she had a peacock feather in class that she would use as a pointer when she was talking about stuff projected on the on the screen. And it was the funniest thing because it's a peacock feather, so it's like bending all over the place. So to make it like kind of point at the thing, she'd almost have to like whip like the wall, where she'd be like, "If you look over here at the drawing," whoosh, like she was amazing. She was really rad. I don't know what made me think of that, but I think I was saying I'm working on a drawing, and it reminded me of her. And that was a weird class. That was a very interesting class. There's an interesting older, like, because at that time, junior college, I think it was like very late teens, very early 20s, so like 19, 21, that kind of thing. And I was taking that class, and there was a lady in there who was French, and at that time, this is like I used to smoke like cigarettes, so I would basically, like, outside of class, be smoking a cigarette. And the thing that was great, and I still miss about smoking cigarettes, is it was always a nice conversation starter with strangers at the time. So, like, because if two people smoke and they're outside smoking, it's like you have this addiction or whatever, but it also is forcing you outside, and you have to kind of sit there for a couple minutes, and generally that'll lead to like really interesting conversations with people who smoke. So at the time, there's this older lady. She's like a French lady, and she was talking about, she's an older lady, and she was basically saying, "You must go to France." And I was like, "Yeah, what's great about France?" And she's like, "France is like kissing." And she's describing it. She's like, "It's great. It's like a kiss, like first kiss." And I still remember that line too. At the same class, interesting lady. She always drew really, really weird, made really weird paintings. That were always like really weird, kind of creepy, suggestive paintings, but like kind of a sweet old lady. I don't know. It's hard to it's hard to explain. But yeah, that was an interesting painting class. Anyhow, that class, we had a lot of those assignments where it would be like, here's a still life. I've set up a skull. I've set up this in the class with this light, and you're going to draw it this way with these materials. I also remember that was one of the first classes where we really got into gesture drawing, which at the time I didn't really understand. Now I love gesture drawing, but at the time I just felt like, can we just sit down for 4 hours and draw this the real way? Whereas now I kind of get it. Like, a gesture drawing, super fun. Yeah, cool. We got that pose. Let's move on. Um, but yeah, and the gesture drawings were always funny assignments because, again, she said drawings, so it'd be like, you gesture drawings. Work on your gesture drawings. Anyhow, I will say this too, man. Like, being an artist, the classes are some of the coolest classes you'll ever have, and art teachers are amazing people generally. And they're usually pretty eccentric and wacky and awesome. You know, because we art types, you got to be a little nuts. Like if that hasn't become clear from what I've been saying, you got to be a little strange to kind of do this thing, 'cause it requires a lot. But that's the other thing I've realized in life is, like, I don't think there's a lot of normal people. you know like, do you guys think Arnold Schwarzenegger was like a normal person? Like, just an average dude who's just like, yes, I'm going to consume my life with lifting, powerlifting, everything around me, and eating crazy amounts of food, eating 20 eggs. Anyhow, whatever it is, Point being, like, everybody's a little weird. Not everybody's Arnold Schwarzenegger, thank goodness. That'd be a scary world where I would be at threat all the time because I am a weakling. But not just that, it's like, But everybody's got their weird thing, you know. Some people like dedicate themselves to like watching sports all the time. They're super geeks. Geeks for the sports teams or the stats or you know. I don't know. It's we're all kind of strange beings. Okay. We are getting closer, guys. So generally with this comic, like I do try to like shade the characters first because that helps me establish the lighting. Because it's like, you know, if I started overall and wasn't starting on the point of focus, it might be hard to kind of make the point of focus stand out, you know? So yeah, we're shading the drawings here. Is Frank still there? How are you doing, Frank, man? What are you up to? Well, you already said you're good. How's Roll for Tarako going? I noticed that you were doing the monster hold on a sec. Like the monster role playing thing, and it looks really cool. So I'm kind of curious how that's working out, and yeah, it looks really fun. Again, I've been kind of absent from YouTube for a bit, so I have missed all the updates outside of social media. Like watching channels and keeping up with everything. So, but I saw a post about that and I was like kind of excited because I was like, oh, cool. I want to know how that goes. We've got, you know what? We might be able to, you know, you can quote me on this in a half an hour. I know. 2 hour mark. I'm out. But yeah, let's see here. Oh, yeah, I was going to say, so you can quote me on this if I don't get there, but I think we're going to actually be able to finish this panel too. So we'll see. But it's looking pretty possible at this point. All right, so let's see what we got here. We've got a couple things coming. I'm gonna do this pillow here, but make it get a little shaded. and just kind of focus on getting as far as we can by the 2-hour mark. Dylan said, "Good night, Joshua. I'm hopping to bed. I'd stay up longer, but I have a morning appointment." All right, looks good. Thanks, Dylan. Have a good night, man. Appreciate all of you guys actually who are watching this live, and also those of you in the fight trying to make these things that we do. We're just going to get this. Hopefully we'll finish this whole panel. Great. Okay. So, let's see here. Good. I don't know why I've had Better Oblivion Community Center in my head all day. And I haven't listened to music all day. But for some reason, Better Oblivion Community Center's in my brain. I always find that interesting when like a song is just kind of like lingering in your mind. And just kind of, it's got to be like just kind of stored somewhere in, the memory banks of your brain, and just out of nowhere, like you can just have like a tune just pop up, like, almost as if it's playing in the background. I think memory is really fascinating. That it's malleable, that there are certain things in memory we don't have a ton of control over. Like, weirdly enough, you kind of don't control whether a song gets stuck in your head or not. Like, I don't know if that makes sense. Like, it's like this weird innate thing in humans where like we hear a really catchy tune or something, and it's like you don't know what's going to get stored. Okay, so we've got this going. Kind of like this, but I want it a little more. It's going to get darker as it goes. This is almost going to get black under here. Similarly, we'll have it kind of black here. Start at like the darkest. Work our way up. And okay, I like that. Okay, so then we'll do our opacity a little bit and then get this erased out. We have 15 minutes left. Speaking of 15 minutes left, if you guys have been enjoying this stream and it's provided you some entertainment or company, please hit that like button. If you haven't subscribed yet, consider subscribing for more art content. I'll be live streaming a lot more as I do these pages. Sometimes while I work on freelance. Sometimes, rarely, if I'm working on a guitar. And I appreciate you guys in the community kind of stopping by and saying hello and keeping me company for a little bit. Was excited to hear about Christopher's book, so I'm definitely going to be checking that out. Christopher Runciman's newest book that apparently is on Amazon, which I'm kind of excited about. And we're going to go ahead and save this. And we're going to go ahead and adjust. Till I can buy Christopher's book, I might have to check out the preview that he did kindly hook it up with. Let's see here. Okay. But I do want to pick up the book. Try beginning of May to do so. And this is going to be pretty dark. This is going to be kind of a shadow cast by her. It's going to get dark as it comes closer. We're going to have this kind of get darker as it recedes. I want this to be pretty dark back there. I like that idea. Okay, now let's get this. I almost wonder if, will this work? For this one, it might actually make sense to do a selection. Yeah, this should work. Yes. Did that expand too much? Okay. And we'll select inverse. Oh. Oh my goodness, something went wild with my Wacom for a second there. Select, modify, select inverse. Okay, there we go. And then we'll do our deleted out. Where's our lovely floor? Yeah. Cool. Now all I have to do is that background, and we have 10 minutes. So let's start with the curtains. I'll just go ahead and start with the one furthest here. And again, we're just kind of going to the line and then erasing out where it kind of meets. And then I think what we'll do is have some shadows kind of coming from here. Oh, wait. Ooh, one more I need to do. Okay, and now I want to do some shadows here. So like kind of cast almost by him. And then also on the back here where it's going behind the couch. Maybe as it gets closer to the top. Okay. So that's our drapery, our curtains. And hopefully we are able to finish this because we have about 8 minutes left of the stream. And then we will be calling it. Okay. And then one last thing to do, which is just to kind of do these very basic kind of receding back shadings. We just got to do one more. We might have actually finished this panel, which is a little further than I thought we might get. I thought we might get like a little bit into this panel, but not quite done. And now it's looking more and more like, no, like we might actually finish. It's pretty exciting. So I do want this to get a little darker as it gets towards this corner. Towards the bottom. And it will kind of lighten up as it goes towards the top. And then just to add a little illusion of depth, we'll just add a little bit there as well as here. Cool. And now we just need to, let's go here. Let's do this. Since these are broader areas, this is actually possible, which is cool. Okay, then we're going to select modify, expand. And I want to deselect this spot. And I want to select inverse. Oh my goodness, hopefully this works. And then delete. Boom! Shakalaka. Oh no. A couple spots I don't like there. So let's try a couple things. So one is yeah, I don't like how that created these kind of funky things. So I'm going to fix those real quick. That's one of the reasons I can't do that selection trick when it comes to this style as often, because it can leave these sort of floaty areas that just look strange. And somewhat unnatural. Whereas with like alias line art, you know, you don't suffer that issue underline, because your lines are like solid black, right? But here, you know, you kind of have to clean that up a little bit if you go that route. Okay, and we're going to zoom out. I'm actually pretty happy with that. I'm going to go ahead. The one thing I don't like is like, why is this dude's leg like glowing? So we need to have this kind of be more cast shadow side. And then similarly, this needs to be like more on the cast shadow side. Because it just doesn't make sense that he's going to be getting that much reflected light. Maybe a little bit here. Maybe some there. But yeah, nothing close to what I had before. So we're going to go ahead and save this. I don't like this either. Should be more in shadow. There we go. Okay, that's where we're going to leave it for tonight. And then I can fix some of this later. There's a couple things too, like her dress needs to get a little darker as it goes down. But I might also be kind of rushing things a little bit because it's getting late. So what we're going to do is go ahead and save this, and then we can adjust if there are changes needed tomorrow. So I'm going to go ahead and merge visible, all the stuff, all the layers. And then we will put this here and hit save. All right. So we're about at the halfway point of 104 on the shading. And then we'll, after we're done shading, obviously do coloring. But for now, that's going to do it. Thanks to everybody who tuned in. Appreciate you guys. And I will see you on the next live stream. Goodbye.